Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening and welcome to the show. I'm Caleb Bond. Well, let's take a look at tonight's top stories. Here's what's coming up on the program. The federal government is under fire after it confirmed Australia will not send a warship to the Red Sea, but instead a small group of ADF personnel. Is the ABC finally waking up to its biased reporting? I'll bring you the latest saga involving more anti-Israel propaganda. Another US state follows Colorado's decision to dump Trump from the 2024 primary ballot, plus the proposed new rules that would slash how often the Opera House sales are lit up. Now, as I've said many times, if the government truly believes nuclear power is not economically viable in Australia, then you may as well just lift the ban. I mean, they say it's too expensive, it can't be built. So lifting the ban would, in effect, change nothing, and they'd be proven right. Just let the market decide. But of course, they're too afraid to let the market decide, because if it does happen, then those who push decades of renewable subsidies and growth will have egg on their faces. I do hope it would be organic, free-range eggs, given the people we're talking about. Now, the CSIRO and the Australian Energy Market Operator seemingly backed up this idea that it's unviable today in their draft Gen Cost annual report. They claim that nuclear power from small modular reactors is the most expensive form of energy available at $382 to $636 per megawatt hour this year and $212 to $353 from 2030. This report also claims that renewable energy is the cheapest form of power, with a mix of wind and solar at 60% of generation, costing between $90 and $135 per megawatt hour this year, and about $65 to $100 in 2030. New brown coal projects, according to this mob, were estimated to cost $118 to $190 per megawatt hour this year, and $110 to $175 from 2030. This was Energy Minister Chris Bowen today.
And the draft report today makes it crystal clear. The cheapest form of energy is renewable energy. Renewable energy is cheaper than coal, cheaper than gas, and much, much, much cheaper than nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a fantasy wrapped up in a pipe dream for Australia.
Oh, this pipe dream line, we've heard it before, Blackout Bowen. So the CSIRO and the AEMO, which is, by the way, pushing for 100% renewable energy into the grid, claims renewables are the cheapest power available. You'd think then that as more renewable energy enters the system, your power bills would decrease, but you and I both know that they haven't. They went up 20 to 25% in July alone. And you'd think with all this extra cheap renewable energy, the power companies are selling us at higher and higher prices, they'd be raking in the profits. But not so, according to them. The Australian Energy Council says in The Australian today that customer profit margins for the big power companies are at their lowest in a decade. So how can these companies be making less money out of more of the supposedly cheapest power available? Well, the answer in simple terms is that the wholesale cost of power has gone through the roof. And why has it gone through the roof? Well, according to the energy regulator, major factors are reliability issues with coal-fired generation assets and the closure of the Liddell power station in New South Wales in April. So in other words, there's less power in the grid, less coal-fired power in the grid, because coal-fired power stations are closing and others are on the blink. But the reason they're closing and on the blink is because power companies and investors have directed their money to renewables, because that's where they've seen bigger profit margins thanks to generous subsidies. So they've allowed the existing infrastructure to go to rack and ruin. Then we don't have enough power. Then it just becomes simple market forces. Less power in the system means the value of the power you do have goes up. Renewable energy may well be the cheapest source we currently have available, but the fact is that is in no small part down to how heavily it's been subsidised. And those heavy subsidies have actually made power more expensive by encouraging the removal of coal faster than we can bring new power online. Every one of these mistakes is paid for by you. Every one of these projects is paid for by you. Every millimetre of the 10,000 kilometres of new power lines the AEMO wants to build to make this renewable dream work will be paid for by you. Which brings me back to the nuclear argument. It's used all over the world. We're the only country in the top 20 energy consumers that doesn't have it. But we're told it's impossible. Why? It's all good and well for the CSIRO and the AEMO to say, well, whoopee-doo, renewables are cheaper, but power is not cheaper. It's more expensive than it's ever been, and it shows no signs of slowing. You can spin it any way you like, but the more renewables have come online, the more expensive your power bills have become. Time to bring in my panel to discuss the rest of the day's top stories. Joining me now is Liberal Senator Holly Hughes and PR Council Managing Director Christy McSweeney. I think I'm going to have to call you the Bond girls. We've got the two blonde lasses here, the roses next to the thorn, which is me, of course. Now, the Defence Minister Richard Marles, of course, today announced that Australia will be sending a small number of defence personnel to the Red Sea, but no warship. And this obviously all comes on the back of the Iranian-backed Houthi rebel group, which has been attacking cargo ships in the region. I mean, we have a problem here, clearly, Holly, where we cannot send a ship because we literally don't have the ships to send. I mean, we've got 3, I think, and they're not really up to scratch. So what can we do? So Marles says, the US has got no problem. We're going to send 16 Defence Force personnel. I mean, surely we can do better than 16 people.
Look, and I'm not sure it's actually correct that we don't have a ship that's ready to go, because when the request was first made, the Navy certainly said that they were ready to respond. So I'm not quite sure that that's actually the truth behind the matter. But this is a disgraceful decision. The US, the UK and a series of our other close allies are all joining in this defence of the Suez Canal, which is what is 12% of the world's trade goes through. And the fact that we have walked away from being part of that alliance and this constant move by this government to move us away from our traditional allies, and in fact the decision has now been applauded by the Chinese government. So within a couple of weeks, we've had Australia and the UN vote with Iran, Russia and North Korea, and now we're making decisions against a US request that is being applauded by China. So if those facts alone don't give Australians a great deal of pause to think about what this government is doing to our future national security concerns, leaving us, their whole thing is, we're concentrating on the Pacific. Well, let's hope nothing happens and our allies turn around and say, well, we're not worried about the Pacific. That's your bailiwick. We need these guys if anything happened down in the southern part of the world. And this absolute defiance of a US request, of them refusing to be part of something that could have not only a great impact on world trade, but a very direct impact on Australians' back pocket when it comes to cost of living pressures, because the more goods that can't get in, the more goods that can't get out, and the higher costs associated with them will just mean that we're paying more for everything at home.
Well, don't forget that the Chinese state media was publishing editorials supporting the Albanese government, or it was then the opposition, when they were running for government last year. So we kind of know where this was all going. This was Richard Marles today.
Yeah.
We are making a contribution which is significant, which is commensurate with our size and our place in the world.
I mean, blah, blah, blah. If we don't have defence capability, Christy, we're stuffed.
Look, the government released a Defence Strategic Review not long ago. It's the first one that's been done in a couple of decades. I think there was a mini one done in 2012. But this is a significant piece of work, and it simply says that Australia needs to develop a restructure of Navy, Air Force, and in particular, and very controversially, army. So there was a lot of talk around defence and strategic policy advisors in Canberra that the review was welcome, but it didn't have a roadmap of what Australia needs to do to equip itself to defend itself, and not signalling that we're ready to stand with the United States and the United Kingdom is a snub to AUKUS, it's a snub to the alliance, it's a snub to our top two foreign direct investment partners in Australia. And I have no idea what Anthony Albanese spoke to Joe Biden about. If this is the first test of those two trips to the United States, I would really like to understand what went on.
We don't know what he's talked to anyone about. Well, we know he talked to Xi Jinping about Tassie Devils and pandas, but I mean, apart from that, his interactions with world leaders, we don't really know. Now, look, if I had it my way, we would abolish councils. I hate them. I used to be a local government reporter. I saw it up close. I have a distinct disdain for councils, and I never fail to have this confirmed again. A Northern New South Wales council debated this week whether to install 5 nuclear-free zone signs across the region, because they decided earlier in the year that they were going to become a nuclear-free zone because, I don't know, they were going to build a waste plant on top of them or something, who knows. But the cost for these 5 signs, $41,000. Now, I mean, this proposal came from the Clarence Valley Climate Change Advisory Committee, whatever that is. I mean, Holly, can't these people just stick to their knitting or perhaps more accurately, the emptying of the bins?
Well, that's right. Rates, roads and rubbish. That is what councils are responsible for. And we know that many of them aren't too good at doing those things. But this is just another example of this woke virtue signalling that councils seem to find part of their remit. I mean, has anyone in the Clarence had to think about if they actually need access to an MRI? I mean, do their hospitals have MRI machines? Because the use of nuclear medicine is actually quite a considerable part of healthcare nowadays. So it is just, I mean, it's beyond stupid, but it's an absolute shame for those people and ratepayers in the Clarence that are now going to have to stump up through their rates an extra $40,000+ for them to put these stupid signs up.
Well, I think they've decided they're not going to do it in some sort of breakthrough of common sense. But the fact that it even got... Because like when a proposal comes to council, it has to go to the council staff, and the council staff then put it on the agenda to go to the... I mean, the fact that it got through all that process to begin with is just extraordinary. Now, Labor is in the spotlight today after it was revealed by the Oz that Bill Shorten's department, Services Australia, failed to answer any of the 362 questions asked of it by deadline during the latest round of Senate estimates. But Shorten says they haven't been answered because he reckons the coalition got ChatGPT to write them. I mean, Christy, in all your days of working for MPs, did you ever get out the AI to script your questions?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, I've been there since the dawn of BlackBerry, Caleb, right up until, 24-hour TV and all the technology help you could possibly have. And, gosh, at no point ever do you not write your work, check it. You're almost paranoid sending something to a minister, and the day they take your piece of paper into the chamber for question time, you watch and hope that you have done the right thing, because on your head be it. It is one of the most scary days as an advisor when that happens. If you've got it wrong, oh my gosh. We're pretty serious about question time.
I've got to, just very quickly, Holly, like, come on, 360 odd questions, he couldn't answer a single one of them. I mean, please.
No, and look, I'm pretty sure there's 1 or 2 from me in there, because I don't sit in that committee.
But did you write them? But did you write them with ChatGPT though?
No. No, see, this is the thing, though. So a lot of Senate estimate questions that are taken on notice are questions that are asked verbally that either the representing minister or the department are unable to answer. And so they ask can we take that on notice? So these aren't necessarily questions that are submitted to them later. These are questions that are asked by the senators during the estimates process. So quite often this is quite a robust discussion. It's certainly a live discussion that you might start with one question that takes you in different directions. And quite often, if they can't provide the detail that you want, they will take that on notice. So a lot of these questions that Minister Shorten has ignored, and, you know, not to pick on Bill, he is not the only offender here.
True.
He's one of the worst.
I think it's about 1,600.
But a lot of the departments here. Oh, it is absolutely pathetic. This was going to be the most transparent government, yet they have the most outstanding number of questions on notice. But the NDIS is one of the biggest parts of the budget. I was certainly in that committee for that part of the estimates and asked some questions that they could not answer, and so they were put on notice. So these are questions that are very relevant to very significant parts of the budget, yet Bill Shorten and many other Labor government ministers are treating the Australian people, forget the Senate, but they are treating the Australian people with contempt.
Well, good luck getting an answer.
Unwillingness.
Good luck getting an answer out of them.
questions.
Maybe they could get the answer from ChatGPT. That seems like the easy solution to me. Holly
Well, that
Hughes,
might be a
Christy
good start for
McSweeney.
them.
Thank you for your time. Well, despite its proven role in reducing emissions, as I was saying before, nuclear generation is a major sector in the crosshairs of activists. The latest CSIRO annual report still has nuclear as the most expensive form of renewable energy, while solar and wind are apparently the cheapest. Joining us now is Nationals MP David Gillespie. David, Bowen has consistently used these numbers out of the CSIRO, which we see again today, to justify this $387 billion price tag that he's put on nuclear. I mean, are the numbers legit?
No, look, the Gen Cost is a flawed report. I know a lot of work's gone into it, but they are missing the wood for the trees. They've got very poor information on current established nuclear builders' costs of what they estimate these new plants would cost, like GE Hitachi, their 300 megawatt one, or Westinghouse's small modular reactor. They hang it all on the cost of a NuScale plant, which is the only one they've looked up, which, as you know, is a very big SMR. It's really hard to use that as a good cost comparator. And they fail to acknowledge or explain to people well enough that the levelised cost of energy is a very poor metric, because what you want is the whole system cost. And with Chris Bowen's plan, what you are getting is multiple variable renewable energy producers in a chaotic random system pumping either lots or very little of direct current into the system. And that makes it very unstable. It makes it very expensive. The prices go up and down. They've had to lift the top limit of what can be bid from about $16,000 over $20,000. And that's because sometimes they're desperately short, and then at other times they've got too much. And when you have a system like that, they don't account for all the costs, like the $62.5 billion black hole that David Carlin, the very respected energy economist, has identified, let alone what many other trained and highly experienced electrical and grid engineers have written to AEMO, pointing all these flaws out, and they just get rebuffed.
But this is why they have to keep
so
peddling
they're just
this.
Doubling down on...
Yeah, and this is why they have to keep peddling the line, renewables are cheaper, because the AEMO has gone full-blown into it, right? Like, their aim is 100% renewables in the grid. So if they don't justify that in some way, the whole thing falls over.
Yeah, but look, they had briefings yesterday in a webinar, and basically they're just doubling down on all the issues that were brought up about the $62.5 billion black hole. What causes that is still there. And they're not accounting for about a third of the costs, which all occur behind the meter in your home, on your roof. All those costs, they don't account for it. But basically, in their virtual giant battery, they're going to be counting on all your batteries, but they don't put those costs in, which is at least a third. And as I said, the LCOE, the levelised cost of energy, doesn't give you a system cost. You've got to add to that the cost of transmission, the cost of poles and wires, the distribution. When you have VRE or renewables, you don't get any physical inertia to the current. You just get a synthesised DC turned into alternating current, but it has no frequency control. It's all or inertia or any physical inertia, keeping it all stable. So now we've got a very unbalanced grid with next to no reserve capacity. So when the air conditioners and the hot days or very bad weather crank up, we are scrambling to get enough electrons into the grid. Yet the next day you might have excesses. It's a very unbalanced system, and that's the beauty. You know, Finland spent billions of euros getting their new 1600 megawatt nuclear reactor up and running, but it was worth it. Their electricity prices are now very stable, and the retail prices have dropped by 75% because they have this huge load of cheap, reliable energy. Once they're cranked up and running, it delivers very reliable, 24/7, 365 days of the year, clean energy. And it's ridiculous that they are pumping the price up in this document for nuclear, where they could get much better and more accurate lower prices from experienced makers of, you know, dozens of plants around the world. They've all got prices. It's sort of like, you know, Volvo or Ford. If they're planning a new model car, they know exactly what they've got to build it for.
Of course.
And yet they cherry pick one startup company that has actually lost a contract to build one as the gold standard. And this fairyland integrated system plan is just concentrated hope. They also said it all assumes that all the states build all these mystical, highly expensive grids that are going to crisscross at least 10,000 and possibly 28,000 kilometres.
Which is just
wind
insane.
farms
Like
at sea are going to miraculously
they are talking
appear.
about are literally insane. And here we are talking about the fact that, you know, on a hot day in New South Wales, you've got to turn the thermostat up on your air conditioner because we don't have enough power running around. Just mad. David Gillespie, thank you for your time. Merry Christmas. Well, coming up after the break, is the ABC finally waking up to its biased reporting, the latest example of the national broadcaster falling on its sword next. But before we get there, imagine being this dope in Bendigo, who broke into a house and ransacked the joint, but realised halfway through that he was on camera. What's going on over at the ABC with anti-Semitism? They keep putting out all this Jew-hating garbage, then deleting it when they inevitably get rinsed. First they deleted a Triple J segment that played the song Long Live Palestine. Yesterday they sacked presenter Antoinette Lattouf for her anti-Israel social media posts. And today they've deleted an anti-Israel TikTok video, which they'd pinned to the top of their account, by the way. So it was the first thing anyone who went on the ABC TikTok page would see, featuring a Palestinian reporter. Take a look.
Do you notice anything about this fridge? There's no Coke, Fanta or Sprite, and that's a very deliberate choice. Oz is one of many people taking part in the Palestinian-led boycott divestment scheme, which is a movement that lists brands that supporters of Palestinians are discouraged from buying from because they have some sort of tie to Israel, according to BDS. So it's hard to tell how much of a financial impact this movement makes on brands. But organisers say changing sentiment among customers is powerful in itself.
Joining us now is Sophie Ellsworth, media writer for The Australian. Sophie, you've reported on all of this today. This video in particular, it's not just saying, you could potentially boycott people who are involved with the upper echelons of the Israeli government. They're literally saying, go and boycott anything that has anything to do with Israel. Now, if you did that, you'd basically be living in a tent because so much technology comes out of Israel. But why is this, or it was at least, the top story on their TikTok?
So, Caleb, really the issue with this video is this young Palestinian reporter which she is the way she describes herself on her social media, has presented this report on TikTok talking about the boycott movement. Now, that's all fine. I don't have any issues with that, and I don't think many people would. But the problem that unfolds is when the whole video interviews one person, one business owner, who says he's boycotting any businesses with links to Israel. There's no refuting arguments. There's no questioning of this boycott, the ramifications of the boycott. Now, this woman looks like a very young reporter. Where are her bosses? Because they are asleep at the wheel. How did this content get onto the ABC's social media platforms without the young reporters' managers checking it and going, no, let's go back to the drawing board. We need both sides of the argument. They have failed to do this. And this is what we're seeing within the ABC. It appears there seems to be activism, journalism pieces that are making light of, seeing the light of day, and the checks and balances are not in place.
Well, may I humbly suggest that maybe her bosses did see it and they were supportive of it? I mean, surely they're not just self-publishing over there. There's got to be eyes this stuff goes through, and someone approved that to be posted.
Well, of course, Caleb, someone has approved it. Who are these people? Who is allowing this content? Who in the editorial levels at the ABC thinks this type of content is okay? Now, when I put questions to the ABC this morning, that video was gone from its platform. The reporter still had it on her personal TikTok. I asked them about that. Within moments, the video she had deleted, it appears it went from her account as well. Look, Caleb, I could be writing these stories every day of the week. It seems that there's just event after the event with ABC journalists, editorial, and they're always leaning one way. It's never pro-Israel when they're in trouble. It's always pro-Palestinian. And this has gone right to the top, Caleb. Ita Buttrose, the chair, is absolutely livid at how this kind of contact, particularly with Antoinette Lattouf, who was sacked yesterday, how does this happen? Who appoints these people?
Well, so Antoinette Lattouf, right, so she was filling in on mornings in Sydney on ABC Radio. As you say, she was sacked yesterday for these anti-Israel social media posts. She's now hit out saying that she's very disappointed by the ABC's decision. She believes she was unlawfully terminated and she's considering legal options. I now understand there's a statement from the MEAA, which is the journo union, saying that they think the sacking is incredibly disturbing. I mean, the ABC has different standards it has to abide by because it is set down in law that it must be impartial. Why can't the ABC decide? I mean, surely they made the decision in the first place to hire her, but when they actually go, oh, hang on a minute, we shouldn't have done this, surely they're within their rights to get rid of her to stay within the bounds of the law.
Well, they have a charter to uphold and they have to remain impartial. Clearly, they're not doing that. Now, in regards to Antoinette, she's prolific on social media. She has TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. She is everywhere. Her views are very widely known. Her anti-Israel views are no secret. So my question is, who in the ABC decided it would be a good idea to appoint her as a fill-in radio presenter? Because within 2-3 shifts of her being on air, she was sacked. Now, again, management asleep at the wheel. Antoinette has voiced her views for months about Israel. Very anti-Israel views. She's questioned the Gas the Jews video, the authenticity. She's widely known for this. Caleb, how are management appointing people with these views and thinking it's okay? And then, of course, look what they have now. A giant mess. They've got the union involved. They've got the House committee involved. What a disaster for the ABC yet again.
Again, I reckon these people get appointed and these stories go up. They're allowed to do them because management agrees with it. They endorse it. Now, when you get a public backlash and perhaps it goes up the chain to Ita Buttrose, the chairwoman, she comes knocking and says, well, what are you doing here? But the lay staff and the middle management, I suspect, are all on board with it. It's probably those middle managers Caleb, who need to be brought into line.
Well, Caleb, there are definitely people I've spoken to internally at the ABC who are scratching their heads that how did this happen with Antoinette Lattouf? Now, not everyone in the ABC, believe it or not, is all skewed to the left and think this is okay. In fact, there's a lot of people contacting me quite appalled with what is going on within the ABC, but they're too scared to speak up. So the ABC has a giant mess on its hand, but the managers appear to not be enforcing this charter and making sure that the editorial content is fair and balanced, Caleb.
Well, heck, when they did the report into their voice coverage, they found they'd had, more than 50% of the voices or people they'd had on were pro-voice, and they thought that was balance. Anyway, that's the ABC for you. While I've got you, why don't you run me through some of the biggest media stories of the year? It's certainly been a hell of a year, Sophie.
Hell of a year, Caleb. Look, a couple that came to mind. The release of Cheng Lei, and now our colleague at Sky News. This was just a remarkable turn of events. This poor woman who was imprisoned for 3 years, released back home to her family, working here at Sky News. Finally, some good news for her family. Absolutely love that story, and I think Australians do too. Also, the failure with the voice referendum. I mean, how can we deny what happened with the Voice to Parliament referendum this year? It shows that middle Australia, working class Australia, the quiet Australians really, that their voices were heard, because that was knocked over, with a resounding no vote. And finally, Caleb, interest rates. You cannot go past, or in my view, interest rates, the pain households are feeling, particularly in the lead up to Christmas. I can't see that any financial relief coming anytime soon, but a massive story this year with so many interest rate rises throughout 2023.
And as we know, all the polling shows that cost of living are the top three issues for people, and I expect it will remain the same next year. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for joining me so many times this year. Merry Christmas. I'll see you again next year. Well, still to come, government spending data reveals Airbus Albo is living up to his name. What a surprise. Plus, the woman who was fined for parking in her own driveway. I'll be discussing that with my panel next. But first, my thoughts are with the family of Franco Cozzo, who died yesterday, aged 87. Now, our Victorian viewers would remember him for his flamboyant ads that made his furniture shop in Melbourne an icon.
Grand Sale, where in Brunswick and Footscray, Franco Cozzo have the pleasure to present to you Il Modernissimo, bedroom suites, dining room and wonderful lounge. Why don't you come for yourself and have a look at this Magnifico, Il Modernissimo, only can found from Franco Cozzo. Buy from Franco Cozzo.
Well, Airbus Albo's certainly living up to the name. He's spent a staggering $4 million on VIP flights during his first year as Prime Minister, according to new government expense data. And the figures also revealed the biggest spending politicians across the board, which included Victorian Liberal MP Jason Wood, who spent more than $160,000 on printing in 3 months alone. Maybe he was printing money with it, who knows? Let's bring our panel in to discuss this and plenty more. Sky News contributor Gary Hardgrave and commentator Jason Morrison joins me on the desk. Hi. Jason, I mean, $4 million, Airbus Albo, we knew it was true anyway, but why can't these people every now and again just take a commercial flight? We know they're going to be up the front anyway. They're going to be in business or first class. Do something with a taxpayer.
Dignify that, take a commercial flight. I mean, that's like saying, why doesn't he ride a push bike? I mean...
Well, you could do like Pete Buttigieg did over in the US, because he's the transport secretary, and he kept saying, I'm going to ride my bike around for the emissions, right? And then he was filmed going to a conference, pulled up in the car around the corner, got the bike out the back and rode in.
Oh, I admire that. I think that's the sharp way. That's the sharp way to ride a bike. Get the cab to around the corner. Why don't they catch commercial? They'd be the first Prime Ministers in a long time ago. I don't get as fired up about the money it costs to do. The office costs a lot of money to run. I don't mind if there are outcomes that are useful. But remember, he couldn't even find, can we say balls? The balls to raise with China when the Chinese had essentially acted maliciously towards an Australian naval vessel. He couldn't find it, the courage, face to face with them on one of these junkets. So again, I don't mind paying the money if there's an outcome.
Yes.
And the outcome is you're at the table and they take you seriously. He doesn't feel to me like someone is being taken seriously because he's frightened to even raise this stuff with them. And so back to the point, the $4 million, I'm not shocked. That's about standard spending. But, you know, let's go back to the thing. Australians are furious, not because their Prime Minister's on planes and stuff. They're furious because their Prime Minister is not doing what they need him to do to make their lives better and more secure and reduce the costs of their existence. In fact, he's doing the opposite. He's making their lives riskier. He's putting up their costs and their prices, and people have a fair dose of them.
Well, it's a fair point, Gary, because, I mean, you know, he's been called Airbus Elbow because he spent so much time out of the country. We know that. But what has he actually got to show for the $4 million we've spent flying him around the world?
Well, he doesn't get frequent flyer points. I mean, that's the thing you've got to remember. He might get frequent liar points, but no frequent flyer points. Look, I'm kind of with Jason on this, that, look, things cost money. Prime Ministers cost money. But the problem here, the thing I'm more outraged is that all of us are meant to be surviving shrinkflation. The stuff you bought last year is in smaller packets but at the same price, or it's gone up much more. I mean, I can lift $200 worth of groceries, you know, in one bag now. It's getting to that sort of stage. So you just know that everybody else is doing it tough, but the political class. I mean, Terry Butler, the former Labor member for Griffith, will be announced tomorrow is on about a $400,000 a year job with the Industrial Commission in Queensland, a gift from the Labor Party. You've got these people in Canberra who want to have more politicians. I mean, Caleb, we need fewer of them. If we've got to do a whole lot more with a whole lot less, then we need a cut in the number of members of Parliament. Take it back to the pre-1984 numbers, 124 members of the House of Reps, 60 senators. You can actually get a whole lot more done with fewer of them there, and it'll cost us a whole lot less. There you go. That's my suggestion.
I mean, it's
24. Elbow won't do it. He won't do it.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea, Gary, but the problem is that turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Like, I know that Queers for Palestine exists, right? But still, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and who's going to do themselves out of a job? But speaking of cuts, Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, he's going to take this draft policy to National Cabinet in the new year, basically to cap how often the Opera House sales would be lit up. He wants it down to 44 nights a year. Now, under the Berejiklian government last year, the sales were apparently lit up 1 in every 5 nights. Remember, Jason, that he wouldn't light up the Opera House for the coronation of King Charles because apparently it would cost too much money. But it was okay to do it for the Matildas when they hadn't even won the bloody World Cup. What are we doing? Oh, we can't light the Opera House up. How hard is it to buy a projector and set it up?
They half lit it for Israel because they were kind of into lighting it, and they thought, oh, hang on, some people aren't real happy about this, we'll half light it. So it was a bit of a fizzer in the end. You've nailed it. This is his justification for his appalling judgment when he chose not to signify that we got a new monarch. And so he's been, ever since that, been looking for some kind of justification for it. And now the justification in classic government form is bureaucratification. They have found a way to kind of create these rules. And was it 44 days a year unless an arts minister? Do you know the arts minister in New South Wales is?
I couldn't tell.
That was a trick question because I don't know. And the whole thing about it is that this is done for what purpose and for what end? I reckon we went for so long never lighting up the Opera House, just having it for what it was, just a beautiful building. And then it became this fashionable thing to do, and now everyone has a go at it. And we had, at some stage, Volandes wanting to project, horse draws onto the side of it.
The Everest
it's not a billboard. It's whether you like it or not. It's a World Heritage Site. It happens to be one of the most prominent buildings in the world. Can we respect it as such? Just respect it as that. The old girl doesn't deserve this yet.
Well, I mean, Minns was saying, Gary, it was going to cost something like $100,000 to project onto the... I mean, I have a long list of government contracts that I want at the moment, and I reckon that's got to be right up the top. $100,000 to get a projector out for the Opera House. Ooh, boy.
Well, I'll do it for $95,000. I mean, seriously.
You're not undercutting me, are you, Gary?
Put together... Well, look, this is how the free market works. It's a radical concept. But look, let's form an interdepartmental committee. Let's get the people in the East River, New York involved because it's World Heritage. You know, we need to understand what the UN's view of this is. There must be a protocol about this. We've got red tape, blue tape. Blue tape's United Nations tape. Remember the black tape and the green tape? It's completely strangling everybody. If Gina Reinhardt has to have 4,950 applications to open up a fantastic iron ore mine in the fantastic iron ore state of Western Australia, we need the United Nations view on what should happen to the Opera House. And you've heard it first here on this program.
I'll tell you some tape I could get around, Gary. That's some tape over the mouth of politicians. Might actually, you know, help us get some things done. And now, leaked documents, getting a bit more serious here, leaked documents this week exposed deadly delays in call taking for ambulances in Victoria. You had a whistleblower saying that there were times where only 4 people were taking 000 calls, for heaven's sake. But now we've heard from a man in Brisbane who almost bled out after the ambulance call taker wouldn't give them an ETA, hung up on them, called back after 20 minutes asking if they wanted to cancel the ambulance. Eventually his wife, Jason, had to trundle him into a car to take him off to hospital. I mean, every day we see stuff that comes out of the health system or the energy system that just makes you think, are we living in a third world country? Like, with all this tax money swimming around, how can we not have more than 4 people taking 000 calls or an ambulance to come and get a dude who's bleeding out?
Response times in Queensland are appalling versus the national average. The number of ambulances per 1,000 people, appalling per national average. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Queensland. I just looked up the numbers, and the numbers when you compare all the states, I look at it and I'm thankful I live in New South Wales with a remarkable ambulance service, and Victoria's got an all right one, and Queensland deserves one. And here's the problem, and Gary will speak better to it than I will, but you know, New South Wales and Queensland, the population, and New South Wales and Victoria, the population is largely in 2 or 3 major centres. In Queensland, it's all over the state. So you've got extra challenges there, and you've got a bureaucracy and a political class that kind of thinks it only matters where there's marginal seats. And there's your problem. And when I look at those numbers for Queensland, that tells you that it's an accident waiting to happen. And that man is the dividend of that kind of accident. What happened to him is appalling.
No wonder Palaszczuk went, Gary.
Yeah. Well, look, there's a dozen reasons why she went, and I've been saying for a year she'd be going. I must see Richo, see his take on it. But look, the simple and sad reality is that the political class just simply moved up the list. So the Deputy Premier became the Premier and others moved up the ranks. So the same crowd are still there. And the current Premier was the Health Minister in the last 9 years. He was one of the people that set up this whole system for failure. And he's now the Premier of the state. And we had a bloke at a major hospital, a reporter in a major hospital, where there's up to 60 hours of waiting in the emergency department to finally get things settled. This is not a go at the doctors or the paramedics. I've had dealings with the paramedics because of family circumstances, and I've had 14 hours. They ring up and say, yeah, we'll be there, but can we wait till tomorrow? Is this life-threatening? Can this ambulance come tomorrow? 14 hours of waiting. So we need more, but if they were clipboard carriers or iPad carriers, we would have battalions of them. The Premier comes from the union for the clipboard carriers and the public servants.
Yeah, of course.
And so he wants as many of them as possible because that's his political support base. We need more paramedics. We need them to be paid more. We need more doctors. We need them to be paid more. Coppers, fireys, the whole lot. But, public servants, plenty of them, all because that's what the Premier wants.
So many better ways we could be spending this money. I really wanted to talk about this story about this woman who got fined for parking in her own driveway, but we've run out of time. I might have to bring it to you.
Spent the whole day working on that one. Thanks very much.
Jason Morris and Gary Hardgrave, thank you so much for your time. Well, coming up, another US state declares war on Donald Trump. All the fallout from Colorado's decision to remove the former president from the 2024 ballot up next. Welcome back to the program. Well, things are getting very interesting in the US ahead of the 2024 election. Of course, yesterday it was the Colorado Supreme Court removing former President Donald Trump from the primary ballot, citing an insurrection clause in the Constitution. Now, California wants to do the same. The state's Lieutenant Governor has sent a letter urging for the removal of Trump from the Californian ballot. Well, joining me from the US as host of the Australiana podcast by The Spectator Australia, Will Kingston. Will, welcome. California, as I just said, seems to now want to jump on board with all of this stuff. How's it going down in the US? What's the reaction?
Yeah, real last days of Rome vibes over here, Caleb, which is fun in its own little way. Look, this is nakedly political. It's no coincidence that it's only blue states that are trying to take Trump off the ballot. But moreover, this isn't going to change the electoral maths. In all likelihood, the Supreme Court is going to strike this down in a matter of weeks. Even if they don't, there's no way in the world that Trump is going to be winning Colorado or California. And so what does this say? Well, it says that the Democratic establishment is astrategic. They don't really, they're not thinking about beating him at the ballot box anymore as much as this moral crusade just to take him down by any means necessary. And it's going to blow up in their faces.
I mean, as I was saying to Greg Sheridan last night, I think this is the worst thing you could do if you wanted to beat him at the ballot box, because every time they do this stuff, including all the other indictments they put in him, whatever, it just boosts his popularity. I mean, it confirms what he's been saying all along. They're coming for me because they're coming for you. Joe Biden responded to the Colorado Supreme Court decision. Have a listen to what he had to say.
Well, I think certainly it's self-evident. You saw it all. Now, whether the 14th Amendment applies, I'll let the court make that decision. But he certainly supported an insurrection. And no question about it.
No question about it. So it would seem that Biden is suggesting that this ought to go across the country.
I'm surprised you can get the word insurrection out at this stage. He's getting worse and worse, isn't he? Look, there are questions about it, and the questions are answered along party political lines. If you look at the judicial thought on this, basically, if a judge was elected by a Democrat, they're going to say it is. If a judge was elected by a Republican, they're going to say that it wasn't, or it doesn't constitute insurrection. This is so damaging for the American trust in the judicial system. I saw a really interesting tweet just before coming on that looked at the 7 judges on that Colorado ruling. The 4 that did think that this constituted insurrection came from Ivy League schools. The 3 that didn't came from state schools. Now, whether or not you think that is determinative or not, there is just this perception in America now that the judges aren't reading the law book. They're just going off their own personal ideology and making decisions on that basis.
Yeah, and it's not just the trust in the judicial system, it's the trust in the concept of democracy itself. And I mean, the president of El Salvador, he wrote about it on X, formerly Twitter. He said that the US has lost its ability to lecture any other country about democracy. I think he's got a point.
Yeah, yes and no. Like the problem with all this stuff is it enables tin pot countries like El Salvador to make those sorts of comments. The fact of the matter is that if you actually look at the last few years, the checks and balances in the US democratic system have largely worked, or else Donald Trump would have stolen the election in inverted commas. But the other interesting thing is I actually don't think America wants to be lecturing the world about democracy as much as it used to. And I think that's the real problem here. They don't have that same light on the hill philosophy, particularly on the Republican side, that they once did. That perhaps is the bigger tragedy than what the El Salvadorian president seems to be suggesting.
Yeah, I just think if you start going after people through the courts, you're basically admitting that you've lost the argument. We've only got 20 seconds left, Will, but Trump is now using this to his own advantage. He's out using it to fundraise. How did they not know this was going to happen?
Of course they knew. They knew it, but they don't care anymore. They don't care as much as making a moral stance to say that Donald Trump is evil and needs to be stopped by any means necessary. In 10 seconds, I'll say I think this will help Trump. I think it'll also help RFK Jr. Watch his numbers go up after this as well. Yes,
it's a very interesting point. Will Kingston, thank you for your time. Merry Christmas. Well, thank you for your company tonight. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Last show of the week, last show before Christmas. Make sure you tune in for a rip snorter before you go off for a good Chrissy. The Bolt Report is up next with Steve Price. Good night.